The sun was setting over the dusty roads of Burkina Faso. Golden light stretched across the fields, and children ran barefoot through the village, their laughter echoing against the clay walls of simple homes. It was a place that seemed untouched by time, quiet, humble, familiar. Down one of those narrow paths, a convoy slowed to a halt. But this was not the arrival of a distant dignitary with trumpets and ceremony. There were no red carpets, no cameras flashing, just a young man in a simple camouflage uniform and a red beret, stepping out quietly onto the soil he once called home. It was Ibrahim Traore, no longer the boy who once carried books under his arm, but the president of a nation. And yet, as he looked around at the huts, the fields, and the faces of villagers who remembered him as a child, he felt smaller, humbled. He wasn't here to give a speech or to stand on a podium. He was here to walk again on the same ground where his story began, to remember the nights when kerosene lamps were the only source of light, to honor the place that shaped him before the world ever knew his name. The people gathered quietly, their eyes wide, their hearts heavy with both pride and disbelief. And among them was one man, an old figure waiting with something in his hands, something that carried the weight of memory. In the quiet crowd that day stood a frail figure few noticed. He wore a faded shirt, sandals worn thin at the heels, and in his hands he carried an old notebook tied together with a small piece of string. His eyes shone, but behind them was a weight of anticipation that words could not capture. He was the teacher, the man who once sat for hours under the dim glow of a kerosene lamp, teaching village children their first letters. He never had a high salary, never sought recognition. All he had was a boundless love for planting the seeds of knowledge. Back then, Ibrahim Traore was just a thin, quiet boy who often sat in the corner of the small classroom. But his eyes were different. They lit up as if every letter his teacher scratched onto the wooden board carved itself deep into his heart. The poor teacher could see in him a hunger, a yearning to rise beyond the limits of circumstance. He remembered clearly, on stormy nights when the wind blew out the lamp, young Traore would still press on, carefully shaping each word in his battered notebook. And in those moments, the teacher would whisper to himself, "One day, this boy will go further than any of us could ever imagine." Now, after so many years, teacher and student stood face to face again. The teacher remained as simple as ever, but the boy had become a president. And yet, between them, the same invisible thread still bound their hearts, the flame of learning first lit so many years ago. In the old teacher's hands was a battered notebook. Its cover had turned yellow with age, its corners frayed and torn. Some pages were still stained with ink blurred by the rain from long ago. To anyone else, it might have seemed worthless, but within it lived the journey of a boy's childhood. With trembling fingers, the teacher opened the notebook, turning its pages slowly. There were crooked letters, shaky handwriting, scattered numbers, and even childish scribbles of simple mottos like, "I want to study so I can save my country." It was the notebook of young Ibrahim Traore. The teacher had kept it for decades, not because it held material value, but because he believed that within those fragile pages burned a flame that the next generation should never forget. When he placed the notebook into Traore's hands, the small room seemed to fall into silence. The young president bowed his head, his hands shaking as he received it. His eyes glistened with tears as he saw the handwriting of his younger self. Memories came rushing back. The sound of rain hitting the thatched roof, the faint glow of a kerosene lamp, the steady voice of his teacher repeating each letter with patience. It was no longer just a notebook. It had become the symbol of a dream, the dream of rising above poverty and ignorance to build a future for his nation. As the notebook rested in Ibrahim Traore's hands, his eyes turned red with tears. The president, so often seen as strong and resolute, now stood trembling, like a child once again before his old teacher. The elderly teacher placed a hand on his shoulder, his voice shaky but warm. "You have gone further than I ever imagined, yet I still see in your eyes the light of the little boy you once were." In that moment, Traore was no longer a president, no longer a military leader in uniform. He was simply a student, standing before his teacher, with tears running down his cheeks as proof of a gratitude too deep for words. The villagers stood in silence around them. Never before had they seen their leader cry. And yet it was that very display of tears that moved them more than any speech ever could. For these were not tears of weakness, but tears of memory, of gratitude, and of humility. A few young people quietly raised their phones to capture the scene. But what they recorded was not just a president in tears. It was a living lesson. True greatness is not in standing above everyone else, but in bowing to those who first lifted you up. The moment Traore wept before his old teacher was not only moving, it was proof of the power that comes from remembering where we come from. When a person of great success returns to the place where their journey began, they don't just rediscover memories, they find new strength to keep going. That bond with the past ensures they never forget where they started and why they must continue their mission. Throughout history, great leaders have often returned to their humble beginnings to draw strength. In America, Abraham Lincoln spoke often of his childhood in a log cabin to remind the nation that every individual, no matter their birth, has the right to dream of freedom and equality. Barack Obama returned to his old school in Hawaii to tell students, "If I could do it, so can you." The common mistake of many who rise to success is treating their poor beginnings as something to bury, as if it were a source of shame. But in forgetting their roots, they lose empathy. They lose the ability to connect with the very people they claim to serve. Traore chose the opposite. He showed the world that humble beginnings do not make a leader weaker, they make him stronger, because only when we know where we come from can we truly know where we are going. In that small village room, everyone saw a president in tears, but behind those tears lay a deeper truth. The strength of a nation begins in the hands of its teachers. The old teacher of Traore's childhood had no weapons, no wealth, no power. All he possessed was a piece of chalk, a worn wooden board, and the faint glow of a kerosene lamp. And yet, from that humble setting, seeds of knowledge were planted. One of those seeds would grow into the man who would one day lead the nation. This story is not just Burkina Faso's. In every country, teachers are the silent architects who build the foundations of the future. They may never appear in headlines or receive applause like politicians or business leaders, but they hold the long-term destiny of a people in their hands. In America, countless teachers in underfunded schools still spend their own money to buy books and pencils for their students. Many devote their entire lives to small classrooms without ever being celebrated. And yet, those classrooms raise the doctors, engineers, scientists, and even future leaders of tomorrow. The greatest mistake a society can make is to see teaching as just another job, forgetting that teachers are the ones who lay the foundation. A house cannot stand without its base, and neither can a nation's future. The moment Traore embraced his old teacher was a reminder to the world: never underestimate those who plant the seeds of knowledge. Without them, there would be no us. The story of Traore and his old teacher is not just a moving memory. It is a warning. A nation will always pay a heavy price if it does not value education. History is full of places trapped in cycles of poverty and injustice because they neglected the task of educating their youth. When a child grows up without access to knowledge, the dreams of an entire people are narrowed. In Burkina Faso, many villages still lack schools, teachers, and books. Yet even in that hardship, one poor teacher lit a spark in a boy, and that boy became president. It shows us that even a single flame can drive back the darkness of ignorance. In America, this issue is no stranger either. Millions of children in struggling neighborhoods attend schools that are underfunded, with too few teachers and crumbling classrooms. For a wealthy society like the US to let this happen only underscores a truth. If education is treated as a burden, the future of the nation will carry the burden of its neglect. The common mistake of governments is believing that investing in education yields no immediate return. What they forget is this: a generation left without proper learning will lead to a society full of instability, disillusionment, and long-term decline. The moment Traore held that old notebook is living proof of this truth. Without one patient teacher and one worn notebook, would Burkina Faso today have a leader carrying the dream of change for his people? When Ibrahim Traore pressed the old notebook tightly against his chest, the entire village fell silent. That image spoke louder than 1,000 words. A leader may wear a uniform and govern a nation, but deep in his heart, he remains a student indebted to his humble teacher. Gratitude is something that cannot be bought with power or wealth. It is nurtured by memory, by the people who appeared at the right time to lift us up along our journey. For Traore, his old teacher had not only taught him letters, but had also taught him that knowledge can transform destiny. In America, many great figures have pointed to their teachers as their silent heroes. Oprah Winfrey once said that without the encouragement of a teacher who believed in her, she might never have stood on a stage. Bill Gates spoke of a math teacher who sparked his passion for problem solving, laying the foundation for what would later become Microsoft. The mistake of modern society is often to chase personal success while forgetting to honor those who paved the way. But the truth is this: wherever we stand today, it is because someone once gave us wings. The moment Traore bowed his head before his old teacher carried a clear message. True strength is not measured by position, but by the ability to remember and honor the hands that lifted us at the very beginning. When Ibrahim Traore bowed before his old teacher, it was not just the act of a grateful student. It was proof of something greater. Leadership is not only about power, it is also about humility. A president may command armies, negotiate with world leaders, and reshape national policies. But if he cannot bow before the foundations that made him, his power is hollow. Throughout history, the leaders most revered were not remembered for always standing tall, but for knowing when to bow low. Nelson Mandela spent his final years visiting small villages, shaking hands with ordinary people, reminding them, "I was once one of you." During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln was known to kneel in private prayer, admitting he needed strength beyond himself to keep the nation whole. So it was with Traore. The image of him weeping before his teacher did not make him weaker in the eyes of his people. It made him more human, more trusted. For citizens do not only need a commander, they need a man of flesh and heart. The mistake many leaders make is thinking that showing emotion or humility makes them appear fragile. The truth is the opposite. Humility does not make one smaller, it makes one greater in the hearts of others. That day, in a small village of Burkina Faso, a powerful message was sent. A great leader is not the one who always stands above, but the one who bows low enough to remind the next generation of the hands that first lifted him up. The old notebook, once forgotten in the corner of a small thatched home, had become a symbol. It was no longer just a bundle of worn pages. It was proof of the power of knowledge, of perseverance, and of the silent figures who stand behind every great journey. After that reunion, Traore placed the notebook in a place of honor, not to boast, but to remind the next generation. We all begin with small pages, and it is those very pages that can one day write history. The old teacher might not live long enough to witness all the changes, but his heart was at peace. For his life's work, a piece of chalk, a kerosene lamp, and a notebook had created a legacy greater than any medal or certificate could offer. For the people, the image of their president weeping before the notebook became a lesson. All success has roots, and gratitude is the bridge that connects the past to the future. And so, from a small village in Burkina Faso, the story of a tattered notebook reached far beyond its borders. It became a universal reminder: never forget your own notebook, the person or the moment that planted the very first seed which set you on your path today.